Okay, everyone, welcome to Pastor, episode 12. And today I have my friend Bryan Barley. So, Bryan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit and where you're at and where you're serving?
Yeah. So I'm one of the pastors of a church called the Summit Church in downtown Denver, Colorado. We have been here for almost a decade. We'll turn 10 in January. This was not the way I thought we would be celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And my wife and I have been married for 13 and a half years. We have 3 kids, a 4th one on the way. So we're doing the whole urban parenting thing, and
Wow.
love pastoring and raising a family in the city.
Awesome. I didn't realize that. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, almost 14-year-old, 11-year-old, 8-year-old, and now 1.5. So we thought we were done. Now we got a 1.5, and it's crazy.
Our youngest currently outside of the womb is only 9 months. So
Yeah,
we had some surprises also.
that's right.
So.
That's great. Well, and so this is probably maybe why you're moving, huh?
Yeah, it is.
That's good. So, well, Bryan, talk a little bit about your call to Denver. You've been there for a decade now. It's hard to believe you've been there that long.
Yeah.
Because I remember we met before you'd even gone out there. So,
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so back in 2009, 2010, I was really captivated. I felt like there was an increased conversation about the importance of planting churches in cities, and was fortunate to be at Southeastern Seminary, where there's a lot of conversation about that, at the Summit Church in RDU, where there's a lot of talk about that, and felt like it really resonated with me. For a lot of different reasons, from my story to the particular culture that I felt really drawn towards. And, as we learned about Denver from afar, you can only know so much about a city without living there. It at least seemed like this city full of people who were vaguely unchurched, who were very young, who were trying to kind of figure out what life is about and have some fun in the progress. Like Denver's kind of a city that's like almost like where you go after college to kind of continue a college lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay.
And we just felt uniquely called and drawn to say, like, what if we planted our lives right in the middle of that city, in the context of a lot of people who are trying to answer life's deepest and biggest questions, and show the exclusive hope that Jesus has to answer those questions, to give purpose and meaning. And so that's what we've been doing for the last decade or so, and it's been great. Came here with no kids, now I have 4 kids, and have seen a lot of people's lives change in the process too.
Awesome. So, came as a church planter. So now, and you've transitioned to an established church. Do you still view yourself as a planter, or do you have you out of that phase now? I mean, we're always viewing a mission field. I understand that, but you view yourself as an established pastor. Then how has your role shifted, or has it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there's tension there, because I think there's right. The right answer is to say, you never lose that church plant mindset, and you never lose that kind of whatever it takes mentality. I think the tension to manage there, I think, is that there's a certain pace required for your family, for your team. Like we planted with a team from the very beginning, for your first staff member or staff members, that probably just isn't sustainable for a long period of time. And I think I've always been fascinated with comparing kind of the startup of churches with the startup of other organizations. And the reality is most people who start things up, in the business world, they sell that thing and they move on and do it again. And Denver's even a place where there's a lot of startups.
Yeah.
And so you'll find people who are 3, 4, 5 years into that company existing, they're starting to have some success. But whoever started that up struggles to make that transition to say, hey, there's just a certain pace that we're going to have to slow down from if people are going to be okay being a part of this for a long period of time. So I don't know, I think we've definitely have transitioned to more institutional, which is a word when we first started, I would have considered almost like a 4-letter word, but it's like, I think you're even seeing, like, right now, the power of institutions in the midst of COVID, right? The staying power of organizations, and while at the same time trying to maintain, the urgency that we began with. at the same time.
But y'all still plant churches, right? And so maybe that's one way you keep that DNA, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've been a part of helping start several churches in the city, and I think even as everybody's trying to like sort of prophesy what the future of the church is with COVID. I don't feel super confident of what the world looks like,
Yeah.
especially the church world. But I think, you are seeing like the need for increased decentralization and, not as many people can get together. So I think that's where we're just increasingly trying to say, how are we maybe recapturing some of that original DNA for things like church planting and stuff like that?
Awesome. So you talked a little bit about Denver. Talk a little bit about the what you see as the common maybe barriers in reaching people in Denver, how it may be a little different than, we've had guys from Portland and Asheville and just different places talk about, and really, everywhere's different. So
Sure.
maybe some of the idols you see in Denver that are hard to reach, break down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the challenge with a city the size of Denver, I mean, and it's not just a city the size of Denver, I think it's any place, there's never a single monolithic culture.
That's right.
But if you were like, hey, pluck out, a normal Denverite, and especially a Denverite that we're reaching.
Yeah.
The joke we always make in our church is Denver is the place where the one thing people are committed to is not being committed to anything.
The real autonomous kind of deal there.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think a lot of times people assume what the church faces in typically unchurched places like the West is the Western US, is a lot of hostility and resistance. To be honest, when I was in the South, I feel like I faced way more hostility than what I face here, because you had a lot more people who had a lot of experience in church, a lot of hurt, a lot of, I had this pastor who did this thing this one time.
Yeah.
I had this family member who did this. Denver is the place where on the whole, you meet a neighbor and you tell them what they do. And it's like the most common response is like, oh, that's really cool, with no intention to ever be a part of it. Or maybe even like some element of, I'd love to check that out one time, but my life is so full of kind of fun activities. I just don't really have a category or a space in my life for like meaningful church membership, for example. If you think about it, like, let's say you moved to Denver and you were like, hey, so a really normal story that we'll see is somebody who moved to Denver because they would grow up coming here on spring break trips, for example, from Texas.
Yeah.
And they're like, that'd be a cool place to live sometime. So you do that, you move here. What drew you here was not like, man, I can't wait to be part of a church. It's like, I want to ski, I want to hike, so, you dropped $1,000 on gear and a ski pass, and the city's super expensive. And, you're gone every weekend and you want to get your money's worth out of your ski pass. And it's kind of this culture of people who are just like full of having a good time, kind of busy having a good time, so it's definitely a difficult thing to break into.
So you kind of have like so when you meet a guy, it's like a combination of like curiosity and apathy, I guess, right?
Yeah, apathy is a great way to describe it. I think I think a lot of the gospel appeals a lot of times of like, now I think this has shifted recently, but I'm just talking about the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. Gospel appeals about like, the world is broken, things are bad, that you're bad, all that sort of stuff. It's like when you're, 22 years old and your life consists of skiing, partying, being in the city full of like really attractive young people who are all like super sexually open, it's kind of like, what are you talking about? I'm having the time of my life. So it definitely requires a bit of a different approach.
So what about this? And this is interesting though, because usually what happens if someone's not, they're not a Christian by age 14, you've heard statistics. So in my experience, what usually happens is somewhere in the mid 30s to early 40s is when you have that crisis in life, where what you've been doing and what you've been trying has not been working. Right. And even as believers, we go through this at some point too.
Sure.
And where we have to reorient, what we're doing and stuff. But have you had people who, have been through life, right? And they show up, they're 35, they're 40 years old, and they're like, hey, I need something. Is that the kind of people you reach?
Yeah, but it's younger. The
even
dynamic,
younger, they're hitting it faster than that.
Yeah, I think the dynamic of our church is, we're probably majority 20-year-olds and probably majority people who our church is the first church they've been meaningfully connected to in their entire life.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
they might have grown up in a like mainline,
Yeah.
Protestant denomination because their grandma made them go, but they stopped going when they were 8 years old or something like that because they joined travel soccer.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, I'm not trying to say every single person in our church is somebody we want to faith. Maybe they went to college and were part of a great college ministry,
Yeah.
but then they moved to Denver because Denver's a place a lot of times people like moving to after college, and for the first time in their life, they're becoming part of a church. But I think we're seeing it more even as early as like mid-20s. And I think it's something about the city, being part of a city that has so many high promises and so much under delivering.
There you go.
Right. So it's like, even the way that people a lot of times talk about cities, it's kind of these places where you go to find yourself, you go to the time of your life, you go to make it in some way. And so I think I think what makes Denver unique is people come here with very uniquely high expectations. And there's a lot of cool stuff to do.
Yeah.
But I think what we find is, people get 12, 18 months into living here, and there's only so many craft breweries. There's only so many
The adventure's worn off.
Yeah. And I think eventually when it boils down to it, a person is a person, and the way that God designed people is inescapable.
Yeah.
And you can only mute those longings of the heart for so long. And I think what uniquely amplifies it is when you're in a place where you're like, it's weird that all of my wildest dreams have come true. There's not kind of a lot of times it's like, there's not a cooler place you can go to.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people are in other environments, they're like, well, once I get to whatever it is, Austin, Portland, fill in the blank, whatever it is, then I'll experience the good life. Well, you've kind of got it here. And then it's like, well, where do I go now? Our job is to be involved in people's lives and say, hey, actually, it's time to start wrestling with the real issues of life.
It's really good. Yeah. So after a few years, you've done everything. It's like Ecclesiastes, right? It's like, okay, now. And so, yeah. Huh. Well, in our area, Charleston area, and outside of Charleston, we're about 30 miles out, is growing super fast. And one of the things I realized here, and I don't know if you get this, but because it's a very outdoorsy area, we're 5 minutes from the lake, and then we're like, just right down the road from the beach. And so wherever you live. And so what we compete with outdoors all the time.
Yeah.
When it rains, we're slammed.
And
I've never been in a church that way. When I was in North Carolina, that wasn't the case. When I was on staff in Columbia, it wasn't the case. And it's like, well, I guess we'll go to church because they don't want to stay at home. And maybe they were going to go hunting, or they're going to go on the lake, or they're going to go to the beach. Do you get some of that kind of thing when activities are taken? Do you get some of the bump in church attendance kind of thing? Pre-COVID.
Yeah, pre-COVID. Exactly. Who knows what it's like afterwards? It's interesting. I think like, so the challenge here is there's always stuff to do.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, I guess.
Yeah. And if the outdoor activities are canceled, there's indoor activities. Again, pre-COVID, from whatever bands happen to be in town to sporting events to, I think when we first started, we thought like we could, it would slow down almost. Like I remember always looking at our calendar and be like, okay, what are going to be like the peak attendance weekends because nothing is going on. And it was like a Broncos bye week. It'd be like the time when the Broncos are going to play Monday Night Football. So Sunday church attendance isn't impacted as much. And so, I think it's part of the challenge here. I one of our customary welcomes when we meet on Sundays is, thanks for being here. We know you said no to about 12 other good opportunities. So being here means you really wanted to be here, and we really appreciate you being here.
Well, that's good, I guess, on that level, because if you have someone coming, it's not like they had this feeling like, well, I know I really ought to be in church, or I told someone to go. And so maybe if they're there, it's like, okay, the hardest step is getting them there, right?
Right.
And, into worship. So cool. Any other peculiarities about the Denver area or ministering that you think of?
There are a lot of peculiarities. Which one do you want me to talk about?
Anyone?
Yeah, I think maybe what's been interesting a decade in is trying to figure out what does it mean to really love a city. I think especially a decade ago, I think still even today, people talk about like,
Yeah.
loving cities, and churches were all putting out like bumper stickers of like, I love whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
a pastor who was here before me said to me one time, and I mean, it really was a brilliantly prophetic statement. He said, the things you love about Denver your first 2 years, you hate about Denver for the rest of your time there.
I can see how that would be.
Yeah, you resonate with that, right? You come, oh, it's cool that we're 45 minutes from the mountains, and all of a sudden, your church attendance is down because it was the first snowy weekend in the mountains, and things like that. And as well as, with a lot of changes in the city, homelessness has become a real issue. That's not just like, these are my neighbors now.
Yeah. Wow.
Trying to figure out how do you navigate things like the house that we're in right now. We're moving a mile away in a week, but how do you navigate things like people camping out next to your garage and leaving needles and defecating on your garage and things like that. I think that's been a lot of what we've been in the midst of, is not just like, hey, a city's a cool place to live because you can walk to things, or there's like these cool bakeries or something like that. But there's a lot of challenges too, especially when you bring kids.
How long has that been going on?
Man, really since the full legalization of marijuana.
Oh, really?
There's been a real increase of the homeless population in the city, and Denver's a city with a lot of support systems for the homeless as well.
Yeah.
So one of my friends who works in homeless ministry in downtown Denver described the city as a destination city for not just the homeless, but a lot of times the chronically homeless. So there's a differentiation there where, when I say chronically homeless, I'm talking about somebody who's panhandling, who's basically kind of, for a wider range of reasons, have said, this is sort of the lifestyle that I'm going to continue in, regardless of what systems are available to me.
That's right. Yeah. Because even in Columbia, when I was there, as a homeless person in Columbia, you could have 3 meals a day and a place to stay over the night, but people didn't do it.
Right.
Mainly they had to be sober to do it, and they just chose not to be. And so they're very difficult to help. I had one sleeping outside my office one time in downtown Columbia, and you feel bad, like, you can give them help, but it's there. So how do you help the person who won't take it?
Yeah. It's interesting, because I think that's one of the things we've really wrestled with, is especially being a downtown church too. We have, a lot of times relationships with people on our street who are chronically homeless, and, and even just trying to learn about the differentiation. A lot of times people are homeless through no fault of their own. There's plenty, like the majority of homeless people in Denver are women and children, are women from low income families who've got 3 kids at home, who haven't worked for 10 years, and their husband had an affair and left them, and they don't have the typical family support who all of a sudden is going to swoop in and help them in a bind, and so it's like, and how do we, because I think sometimes it's easy, I know you're not saying this, but I think sometimes it's easy for people to kind of categorize, hey, everybody is homeless.
Or you think of a homeless, you think of a homeless man who's
panhandling, right? Panhandling,
or who's addicted to some kind of substance,
right? So it's like in Denver, it's like it's women and children that you're not even seeing. They're sleeping in their car and they're going to work the next day. Things like that. So how do you help there while also dealing with the challenges of chronically homeless? And it's tough. It's tense. The city really does not know what to do right now, because it's way on the rise.
Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about, just as a transition from that topic, which is really hard to hear about, and we'll be praying for you and all that, and how the church can reach that. But let's talk a little bit about in the COVID land we're at now, and you said you just restarted.
Yeah.
And we were only out 8 weeks, and we have slowly picked up some attendance. We're probably about 70%, which is really good, but we still have social distance measures. We have masks. We have every other pew and that kind of thing. And most of our people have been very responsible to not come if they've been around it. And so that's been great. And we've been praying for that. And we have seen new people come, but it's a different church, because people have not come back. And so I guess you haven't really experienced that quite yet, since you just opened up, but talk a little bit about what you had to do to keep the church together, and then what what you expect to happen now that you've kind of opened back up, or what you're at least planning to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, we shut down for basically 6 months. Well, shut down, I mean, the church has never shut down, but
The worship gathering and
yeah,
all.
like the typical gathering we didn't do. So we went online. Stuff in Denver here has been more, there've been a lot more regulations. So even now, the max indoor gathering, unless you just have an insanely huge space, which nobody in the city does, is 50 people.
Okay.
That's the max of what you can do. Mass socially distance are the regulations, at least right now. So I mean, that was a really difficult season. Difficult for me,
Yeah.
emotionally, difficult for our team, our staff, and difficult for our people as well. I think, it's been interesting because I'm not sure what you experienced, but for us, with a church full of young people, I think a lot of our people sort of expected to go into this extended quarantine with this expectation of like almost reinventing themselves, like almost what's the new skill, what's the new hobby, and almost like, hey, I'm going to come out of quarantine like having learned another language or something like that. And the biggest pastoral issue we ran into with our people was people really being disappointed in themselves for what they didn't do.
Like wasting time or something?
Yeah, wasting the time almost, or almost like, here's all these things I was going to accomplish, and I was actually less. And it's actually really interesting. I was reading this study by the CDC last week, just showing like mental and emotional health. I don't know if you saw this, but especially 18 to 24-year-olds, which is like a dynamic or group that I'm really interested in because our church is full of people like that. It was just interesting showing that it was basically saying what has happened to people mentally and emotionally over the last 6 months. And anxiety, depression skyrocketed.
Yeah. Substance
abuse to cope with that anxiety, depression skyrocketed. And the most haunting thing I saw was, this is according to the CDC, about 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds seriously considered suicide over the last month.
Wow.
Or so.
A quarter?
A quarter.
Man.
Crazy.
Wow.
Crazy. Unbelievably burdensome. And so, I think there's, mental health is really complex, and there's obviously a diversity of reasons, but I think it has been really shocking to me the way that this time of isolation has really impacted people. And especially I think people where the posture typically towards people in that age demographic is you're sort of having the time of your life, right?
Yeah.
These are the most like wonderful and magical years of your life. And so figuring out how to like shepherd people, especially when you're not supposed to even be together, has been really, really challenging. I don't even know if I'm answering the original question.
No, it's good. No, I just kind of what y'all dealt with, and you said basically you're coming out with a lot of different pastoral issues that you didn't have before, essentially.
Yeah, and I think the real burden I think that I've had is having a real posture of trying to disciple people to have a real posture of kindness towards themselves and towards one another, like gospel kindness, like fruit of the Spirit kindness, like God's kindness leads us to repentance kind of kindness. So not just niceness, not but like a real, it's interesting. I feel like one of the verses the Lord really gave me in the season was, 1 Peter 4:8, I think it is, where he says, above all else, love one another deeply, especially 1 Peter being a book that's written in the context of like crisis, tragedy. And, and for so many reasons, it seems like people have been uniquely unkind, not only to one another, not only to leaders, right, but even to themselves. Just seeing this like real rise of like almost self-hatred, not just sort of like the healthy guilt that kind of leads us to repentance, a godly sorrow, but like a real self-hatred of like, I should be doing something better. I don't know what it is right now, but I should be doing something more meaningful, better. This is a historical moment. I should be changing the world. And I'm just struggling to get out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah. Start by turning off the news.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Seriously.
I mean, we all go through times where we go on Facebook breaks and stuff like that. And I've been reading the book Digital Minimalism. You've probably read it before. And
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
It's good. And it basically says, and I've gone through where I haven't been on Facebook for like 2 years, and I've gone where I'm back on it and this and kind of thing. The reality is you have to be on Facebook to do ministry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, almost most of our senior adults are on it, and I would not know, and they communicate to me through that many times. And so if you get off of it, you really lose that, especially even now. But basically that book basically says you can't just do hacks. You almost kind of need to like destroy the foundation and start over. And so it's really interesting. And basically 30 days with nothing at all, and then build back into what you need, and that kind of thing, and what you absolutely have to have, like, and so I would say lessening influence is, here I am blasting, giving advice here, but lessening influence. But even like like your Twitter feeds, like I have so many people muted, and it's not personal. It's just like I only want to see, because even with Twitter, it's like even if you're not following someone, they're going to still say you should look at this or someone like that or whatever. I have so many things muted because I'm just trying to get the news, or I'm just trying to get. I just want to know what happened in the NBA game.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Or I just want to see this. And so you really have to be aggressive with managing what you bring in, because we can read our Bibles and stuff, and we can read our books, but it's not in our face. The Bible's not in our face all day long.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's so hard with that. And I think that that's depressing.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. I was listening to an interview earlier this week with Paul Rudd, and the actor.
Yeah, he's great. Who doesn't love him?
I know, exactly. And it was interesting because he has like no online presence, and the interviewer was asking him about that, and he basically talked about the amount of energy, basically, like if you're going to go there, if you're even going to like go into that world, the amount of energy it requires to, like, kind of the stuff you're talking about. And it really made me think, because I was thinking like, man, this is a guy with a lot more resources than any of us are ever going to have.
That's right.
He could hire somebody to manage his online presence. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like always that dynamic of like, there's time management, there's also energy and emotional management, and the amount of energy.
And in the quarantine, you have nothing to do but that.
I know.
Your churches are on that, and the apps are designed to give you a dopamine hit when you get a little notification. Yeah. And it's really true. And I don't know, someone needs to write a book on how pastors should handle doing ministry online, because you have to do it, but at the same time, man, it really is, before you even know it, you're just muscle memory. I mean, it's really hard. So that doesn't help. So, come watch us on Facebook. That doesn't help.
That's right. Exactly. As we do this on Facebook.
That's really the challenge. So, well, how about giving, as we close here, we could talk for hours, but how about giving some advice to some guys maybe who are maybe in your shoes, because I would think that this time would be very critical, if not devastating, for new church plants. I mean, if you're a year, 2, 3 years old, because what we've seen, I'm not trying to discourage you here when I say this, but what we've seen as we've opened back up, the last people to come back have been young families with little children. They're just now starting to come back because school started. Now they feel okay about it. And I mean, we had 5 cases in Berkeley County yesterday, so we're kind of on the downward trend. We don't have a lot right now, but really the senior adults are the first ones to come back.
That's so interesting.
Because, now we have some that haven't because they're vulnerable, but the ones that feel like, okay, they wear their mask and they'll come. And then, but the last people to come, I mean, the first few weeks we had like no children. It's really weird.
Interesting.
I mean, this is, we have a Awana ministry with 100 kids on Wednesday nights, or 70 kids.
Yeah.
So they're just now coming back. And so so I imagine a lot of church plants are reaching young people with young families. That's kind of the target. That target might be opting out, for lack of a better term, for a while. So what's some advice you can just get some guys who maybe could be facing that, especially the really young church plants I'm thinking of?
Man, I think 2 things. So, I mean, this has been a lot of, I feel like some of my ministry over the last 6 months has been to,
I bet so,
church planters, especially in our own city. It's uniquely hard in a city like Denver, right? Where it's like, you think about the things I said earlier, about how hard it is to get somebody to be part of a church. And, now it's shifted where, I mean, I'm sure you're experiencing this now too, where the people that are there have to really want to be there.
That's right.
Right. And so you're losing some of the casual church attender.
Absolutely.
Right. Because in some way the bar has been elevated.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd see that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think on the beginning of COVID, everybody sort of thought, is this a cultural moment that's like almost like like revivalistic, right? You see these events every 20 years that sort of get people's attention, and it seems like it's having a bit of it's more of a pruning event than it is like
Absolutely
a revivalistic effect.
I
Which I
think
think at the same time, those concepts usually
you have to have both.
are tandem with each
Yeah,
other, right?
right.
Like pruning typically precedes revival.
Exactly right.
But so anyways, I think,
but it's painful. Nobody wants to do it.
oh yeah, I think two things. I think, or at least what I've seen of working with church planners here. I think one is just to be like, man, we really lament with you because there's not easy solutions here. And I think that's been one of the things is, I mean, even some of the, I'm a little bit, I've been a little bit turned off by the number of people who have been putting out content as if they've solved COVID, right?
Like in church leadership.
Like I think things like this are real. I love things like this that are very much
absolutely.
like, how are we trying to wrap our minds around this?
Yeah, that's
people in the
that's
trenches.
why this exists.
Right. But the number of people that are, putting out a blog post of like, here's the 7 things that will help you get through. It's like, nobody knows. This is unprecedented.
There's no 7 ways for this.
And I think the problem is when we put out content like that, I see with church planners that are almost like, why am I having a hard time with this? Almost like I haven't cracked the code. It's like, man, bro, there's no code to crack here. And
right.
This is really hard. And I feel like a lot of my conversations with guys has just been like, man, if you don't make it in this season, it doesn't mean you failed. I mean, church planting is already pretty much an impossible task. And when the conditions are as ideal as possible, and everything that you've got going against you is fundamentally challenging to starting a new church. So that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is, and I felt like this from the very beginning. Not that I felt hopeful the entire time. There's been some really dark times over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
But I feel like the verse the Lord has continually taken me to is Acts 8:1, when the church starts multiplying in response to persecution. And in many ways, the church starts obeying fully the Great Commission in response to tragedy, right? They've basically been in the context of Jerusalem. And the first time they start to leave the city is really in response to crisis. And I think that's the other thing I've told guys is who are starting is like, you're small, you're flexible. Non-institutions tend to be willing to like dream a little bit more. They tend to be more flexible. They don't have as much history. They're kind of willing to do anything and everything, and they're not as set in the ways as established churches, even like us, are. And I've just told them over and over again, like, I cannot wait to see the biblically fueled innovation and creativity that's going to come as a result of this crisis. And I think, like, I'm really expectant that a lot of the church's best ideas are going to come in response to this crisis and this difficulty and this and these challenges. And so I think that's why I'm hopeful, at least, is a new church plant with a guy, his family, and 10 people. I can't wait to see the type of stuff they're going to create just to survive right now.
So lament and be hopeful.
Yeah.
Very good.
That's right.
I think that's exactly the kind of times we're in. I mean, absolutely. Awesome. All right. Anything else you want to say, or anything encouragement you want to say as we close? Really good.
If you want to say anything about Gamecock football, nobody talks to me about it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot you're out there.
I know.
Listen, all the Denverites, since CU's not playing, they need to adopt the Gamecocks.
That's right. Yeah. So
September 26th. Hey, listen, Tennessee didn't have spring practice, so maybe they're going to be a little gimpy when they play. Or not,
I saw that.
Scrimmage, not spring practice, but
yeah, I saw that. It was like 50 people. 50 people were out. So yeah, I mean that's the biggest thing I wanted to talk about. I have nobody to talk to about college football out here. People are doing other things. So.
Well, you don't have to hear about Clemson like I do every day.
Well, it's funny. Actually, one of our elders graduated from Clemson, and as well as one of my new neighbors. I know. One of my new neighbors in our church, from the place we're moving to, is a big Clemson fan also. So somehow I can't escape it even out here.
Escape it. Well, it's going to be really weird with no Big Ten and Pac-12. So yeah. I don't. You won't, all the games will be done by like 9 o'clock your time, right?
I know.
All right, man. Well, listen, this is Bryan Barley, Summit Church, Denver. I'll put a link to there in the description. If you're in the Denver area, they have just opened back up.
Yep.
But you got RSVP, right? 50 people.
Yep. Have to RSVP, and fortunately that's gone quickly. So I wasn't sure if it was just going to sit or if it'd be. I joked with our church. I wasn't sure if it would sit or if it'd be something like a Hamilton tickets craze or something like that. Fortunately, it's been more like Hamilton than it has been.
Well, yeah, you don't want to miss your shot, so that's good. So.
That's brilliant there.
Well, I got a theater major in middle school already. Who my oldest daughter, she's at a school for the arts for the theater, and I mean I hear that stuff all the time. So I mean more than I even know what it is, but.
That's okay.
But have you thought about doing multiple services for that case then? Yeah.
I think we're just, we were like, we're going to do it once. And I mean, we were at 3 services when we shut down.
There you go. Okay.
So I think we're trying to figure out, the tension of saying, especially with the 50-person cap of what we've got, we're not going to be able to have enough services to have what we have.
Oh yeah, no.
So we've been experimenting some with like, having groups host church-like gatherings in their homes and things like that. We're just a week into it, so we just don't know what's going to work and what's not. But probably some combination of those.
Since you've been given the rules of the game, which is 50 people, if someone gives me the rules, I can come up with some strategies.
Right.
But it's just a matter of what'll work. Yeah, because the bad thing about this is there hasn't been any rules.
Well, I know, and the funny thing too about that is, I'm saying it as if it's very matter of fact, but it's the same way. It's like, I mean, just even yesterday, I was watching a Facebook Live press conference with our governor, and he said something about 125 off the hand, or maybe 175, and I immediately was slacking with other leaders in our church, being like, "Have you heard anything about this?" I'm doing it, and it's just like, the government regulations are so hard to figure out. Even if you're like, hey, we really want to honor these and respect these.
Yeah.
To even figure out what you're supposed to do. And am I considered a church? Are you categorizing me as an assembly of people?
Peaceful protest.
It's so hard to figure out in terms of like,
what
do you even want me to do? I want to follow the rules. I don't even know what you want me to do.
Well, our governor even like basically said, here's all the rules, but he then came back and said, we're never going to shut down a church, so just be responsible. Okay.
So go figure it out.
Yeah, that's right. So when the law is telling you to go figure it out, sometimes you don't know, right? Awesome. Well, Bryan, we'll put it in there, and so the link, and it's good. Enjoy talking with you, and I'll never know how to end these things, so we're just going to end it.
Beautiful.
All right, man.